I bring in Jack and David as well into the discussion now. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions just to get the ball rolling, and we have a couple of people who have their hands up as well. So I'd ask people just put their question into the questions box and we'll try and get to them. Donald, look, we mentioned at the outset, this is part of a bigger picture of the river basin management planning framework and the review of that. Is this happening in tandem, and can you just give us the timelines for the overall river basin management planning process and I suppose the conclusion of this process as well?
I can, Bill, yeah. So we are in the process of working on the draft river basin management plan. It's almost ready to go, so we would hope to launch it, say, in the next maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Once it's launched, then that enters a statutory 6-month consultation period. And again, it's running in parallel with our action programme, and obviously the Nitrates Action Programme is probably the most significant agricultural measure within the river basin management plan itself. Once that consultation period is over, then there'll be about 6 months again where we refine the river basin management plan and publish that, I suppose, perhaps this time next year as our final. So that will be our 3rd cycle river basin management plan. That will have all the objectives for different water bodies. It will have all the measures included for all the different pressures, including agriculture, across the country.
Okay, but it's fair to say all pressures are being looked at in the
absolutely, yes.
Management planning. Jack, just I suppose from a process point of view, there's a lot of focus on this, and I've been through this a number of times, but can you just give us a sense that there's a lot of work behind the scenes goes into working towards an actual review and the engagement process and looking at the science to better prevail and I suppose prepare for this 4-year and review that occurs in relation to the nitrates?
Thanks, Bill. Good evening, everybody. Since the nitrates regulations were introduced, there was a requirement to monitor the effectiveness, and the department have funded Teagasc to run the agricultural catchments programme since. That programme has been running since, I think, 2008, 2009. It cost $1.5 million per year, and last year that was increased to $2.5 million, so we could look at climate as well as water, and that's ongoing all the time. As well as that, we have obviously department funded research, government funded research, the EPA funded research looking at water quality, the impact of measures on farmland. We also have this expert group that meets, so David here, Donald, Bernard are part of the expert group along with a colleague from the EPA, Jenny Deacon, the head of the catchments unit, and we meet regularly to make sure we're keeping abreast of research and what's happening on farms. We don't go away and come back every 4 years to review the regulations. 2 years ago, we had a voluntary review of the nitrates derogation because we could see what's happening with water quality and to keep abreast of it. People might wonder, why did we have a voluntary review? But it was to make sure that we didn't let things get away too far and that would be too much of a burden on farmers. So there's constantly work ongoing. I'd say in KT, there's a lot of focus on water quality as well, training of farmers, training of advisors, and we probably need to do more in that area and will do in the next CAP. It's proposed that there'll be more training for advisors and farmers, because as new research becomes available, we need to update what's happening on farms as well.
Okay, thank you, Jack. A last question then for me, though, maybe it's to David Wall. I suppose we hear a lot of talk about ammonia, the need to reduce nitrogen usage overall. You might give us a kind of a flavour of the interconnectedness of all these issues, and I suppose importantly the question for farmers is, can we produce the same volume with less nitrogen, as a critical issue, and how do we, I suppose, improve the utilisation of slurries, etc., to avail of that or to create that opportunity?
Yes, Bill. I suppose the first part of that, the interrelatedness of the different, I suppose, needs for production with losses, etc. Nitrogen is everywhere in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is full of nitrogen as it is, but it's dinitrogen, which is I suppose is not reactive in terms of causing pollution, etc. However, that's moving in and out of the soil there all the time, and when we apply fertilizers, etc., a large proportion of that nitrogen is taken up by the grass. Obviously, in a grass situation, you have a permanent crop with permanent root structure, so it's very good at taking up that nitrogen. However, as we apply nitrogen both in slurry form, in nitrogen form, and excretion out through the animal, there can be areas in the landscape where there's more nitrogen than's needed. That's very difficult to handle in a grazing situation, sometimes where you're not in control of all the nitrogen. And if that happens to be in the wrong place or on the wrong soil, there can be some losses. By and large, I suppose, farms and grassland systems are very efficient. However, I suppose where you have excretion coming out through the animal in terms of a urine patch or whatever, that nitrogen doesn't get spread equally. So I suppose there are opportunities for farmers to I suppose, make better use of that nitrogen, like, for instance, distributing the slurry that you can control, especially to those outside blocks where silage has been drawn back, and try to get the slurry back out to those. Obviously, by cutting down on nitrogen fertilizer where there's clover gone in, that can be another way. I suppose something that's tried and tested for decades is soil fertility. Lime being the primary one, and where you put nitrogen onto an acidic soil, that nitrogen or all that nitrogen won't be available to the crop. So again, soil fertility, things like low emission slurry spreading has been mentioned. That's another opportunity to I suppose to save some nitrogen directly at the point of application, where it could be lost to the atmosphere on a dry sunny day. So overall, all these things are connected, and ultimately what we want to do is reduce the surpluses on the farm, save in terms of nitrogen fertilizer use, in terms of the farmer's pocket, etc. And hopefully that will lead to a better outcome in terms of both productivity, economics, and the environment.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Now, I suppose there's a series of questions, and I'm going to get to them, but there's a couple of hands up as well. I have Dennis Drennan has a hand up, and now, apologies if this technology works, or I hope it certainly does. I think we can enable Dennis to ask a question. Dennis, if you can, or can you come in there?
Dennis needs to unmute himself. We've unmuted him.
Okay. Dennis, can you unmute yourself there? You're unmuted on our end. Okay. You still with us, Dennis?
Am I okay now?
You are, Dennis. You're here.
Yeah, just a couple. Thanks very much, Bill. Just a couple of questions there. Can you hear me now? You can?
I can. I can hear you. I think everybody can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, just a couple of questions. On the soil water issue, if a farmer has enough storage already to store both soil water and slurry, does he still have to separate it? That's number one. Number two, I suppose, is TAMS going to be available to dairy farmers to build these soil water tanks if needed? With the last round of TAMS there, slurry storage seems to be taken in as one of the criteria for availing of a grant. So is that going to rule a farmer out if he doesn't have sufficient slurry storage? Can he not get a grant aid on the soil water tanks? And the final question then, where, like, you're talking about spreading 90% of the slurry by low emissions slurry tankers from next year. Where are all these tankers going to come from? Like, you're looking at 90% of the slurry. We have a year of a waiting list on slurry tanks at the moment. So where are they going to come from? Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I'm going to hand that over to Jack, I think, or Bernard. But the first thing I'd just say is, look at Dennis, remember, this is a consultation. There's nothing is finalised. I think it's important that the whole process here is open and transparent, and we're putting the proposals to everybody, and I suppose the opportunity for engagement on the practical issues that you raise is critical, you know, so they need to be made through the consultation window in writing along with this evening. Jack, can you give a kind of a sense of direction though?
Yeah.
Consequent decisions haven't been taken, but generally to give a flavour in relation to it.
Yeah, I suppose what's coming back from cross-compliance inspections, Dennis, is that 4 out of 10 dairy farmers have issues around slurry storage and soil water. And that's why we want to target it and highlight it. And the belief is that soil water mixing with slurry means that farmers are spreading when they don't need to spread and ending up spreading during the close period. And that's the logic behind it. Obviously, like you say, if somebody has a large tank and there's 4 weeks storage for soil water in it, plus the storage for slurry, that can get them out over the 16-week close period, say in this part of the country, that should be considered to be okay. And that's what you should submit if that's what you believe. On the grant aid for TAMS, like if a farmer is non-compliant, it's actually in the regulation. We're using European taxpayers' money here through the RDP in TAMS and Irish taxpayers' money to fund people to improve facilities on farms, things like dairy parlours that were grant-aided low emission equipment. And the regulation says after a law is brought in or a requirement, you only have 1 year to fund that. And the department works in accordance with that. In the new CAP, it's 2 years. So from 2023, it'll be 2 years. It's proposed to bring in this requirement from 2023. It's actually 2/3 of the slurry. So 2/3 of the bovine livestock in Ireland are above 100 kilos per hectare. Like 99% of ammonia, 99.4 comes from Irish agriculture. And 47% of that is from housing and storage, 30% from slurry spreading. So obviously it's something that we want to focus in on. And sulfocan now is about 330 or 40 euro a tonne. So the more you can get from your slurry, as you know yourself, the better. So that's why we're promoting low emission slurry spreading. That's the logic behind it. But if there's anything there in what we're proposing that you think can't work or won't work, or there's a better solution, well, then we'd encourage you to put it in writing and send it in. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, I'm going to go take a couple of the questions then that have been put into the chat box, folks. So I have one from Philip here, which is, when will slurry storage on farm be calculated? Will it be the October the 15th or the closing date of September the 15th? If the farm has enough slurry storage to hold all dirty water together, is that okay? And one of the issues which I think you've already addressed, Jack, is around the accessibility of grant aid if there's insufficient storage already. Okay, so just can we answer that question in relation to if there's sufficient storage and when to be calculated?
There's two things there. So the slurry storage calculation will be the same as it is now. So it's not going to start any earlier. The regulation says you need 16-week storage, 18 or 2022, depending on the part of the country you're in. So the slurry storage period starts the same. If you have one large tank, there's no scientific reason why you shouldn't store everything together. The logic behind what we're proposing is to remove the pressure of soiled water on slurry. But if people believe that's what should be allowed to happen, we're proposing there should be separate storage facilities and you can be grant aided for soiled water storage. That's why it's being proposed like this. But if you believe it should be one large tank, people should submit that. Like you said at the start, Bill, this is a consultation.
Okay. One question that's coming here is the whole issue, and it's contentious from Michael, which is in relation to people who are taking land for silage in particular, where they're, I suppose, compiling winter feed, silage, maize, etc., which from land that's not on their BPS, and how will they deal with the whole issue of the fertilizer register? Can farm pay for fert but put it down to a neighbour's herd where it is being used? I think we have to be careful in terms of how we answer that. I think there's some issues of non-compliance already in the.
I think like people should realise, and this has come up a couple of times, like if you look at the amount of money coming in from Europe, 1.7, 1.8 billion every year in subsidies, and we're asked to comply with the requirements of the basic payment scheme. And one of those is that the land you put on your basic payment form, you're actually farming. So what's being described there is somebody is putting it on their form, drawing the entitlements, and not getting payment, not actually farming it. So that can't be catered for. Like that farmer needs to regularise the situation and take the land properly, use the tax incentive of long-term leasing to attract the other farmer into doing that. But as it stands, that can't be catered for.
Okay. Question here from Andy is, given the complexity of nitrogen movement in soil, what will happen if after 5 years there's no significant reduction in relevant indicative numbers? Who can I call on that? Bernard, maybe?
I suppose within the consultation process and within the work that we've done and that we've asked Teagasc to do, they have modelled the environmental impact of the measures that we're proposing. Within that, we've proposed a series of measures that we consider should protect and stabilise water quality. So I suppose it'll depend on a number of things. Obviously, how the water quality monitoring results occur over the next number of years, but essentially the suite of measures proposed we consider are strong enough to meet the challenges that are there.
Okay. One of the issues Pat has raised is the whole issue again of that, you know, feeding around 100 kilos, feeding round bales and using water to dilute slurry, which is a practical thing that happens on many farms. You know, I think we have dealt with the issue of the mixing effectively of soil water and also the slurry. You know, so some of the rules are already there, Jack, in terms of, you know, where soil water from yards is mixing with slurry, it's still defined as slurry in that situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is, and that's been the way since 2006, Bill, when the regulation came in. So some of the things that are being said and information being provided isn't accurate. Like, farmers have been dealing with a lot of this for a good number of years and dealing well with it. There's a small cohort of farmers that need to improve their practice, and they will. On the nitrogen figure that Andy was sorry.
But it's fair to say, though, that if there's adequate storage, you know, on farms, this issue is less of a problem.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing just to point out here, we can get change here very quickly. Like, if you look at 2018, we had a drought and farmers were given advice to keep applying nitrogen, and they did, in fairness, they followed the advice. And we saw the spike in water quality immediately. So it follows, if we cut nitrogen and cut losses, we should see an improvement in water quality relatively quickly. And we genuinely believe these set of measures, as they're put forward, and Lawrence has done the modelling and colleagues in Moore Park, will deliver us improved water quality relatively quickly. But it needs everybody to row in behind it and take all the measures that are being described here.
Yeah, I suppose, look at having been involved in nitrates for quite some time, one of the most contentious issues over the earlier years was the whole issue of calendar farming, you know. And I suppose I've often cited, you know, that if we realistically claim and correctly claim that slurry is a fertilizer, we have to be conscious when we apply it. So you ask the legitimate question of farmers, you know, a typical 4-bay double tank is probably worth €1,000 in fertilizer value, David. And you'd have to ask the question, would somebody go out and buy €1,000 worth of fertilizer and spread it late in the year or during the close period, you know? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, look, slurry is a nutrient, is a fertilizer, and we need to think of it as such. You know, between its NPK value, 1,000 gallons of slurry is worth somewhere in the region of €25 per 1,000 gallons, and as nutrient prices go up, so will the value of it go up. So if we can save more, I suppose, use it a little bit better around the farm, replace fertilizer where we can, that surely will pay dividends, and hopefully we will get the water quality and other environmental benefits from that. The other thing that I'd like to say there is it's also a source of carbon, which we don't give it credit for, and there's potential there to put back carbon into soils, especially silage ground, where there's a lot of carbon being coming out, and that will hopefully preserve yields and production potential into the future. So
okay. I have two questions. One is nearly comment, but there are two questions from Jerry and also from Fergal in relation to this issue of banding. You know, on the organic nitrogen, the bands are very narrow and not too penal at the bottom and very wide and very penal at the top. Surely it should be reflecting modern genetics, a better grassland management, and higher milk solids. And similarly, another question. Sorry, folks, I'm just trying to keep with the thing. I don't know how the banding system that is proposed is fair. 40% of client lists are producing around or just over 6,500 litres. It's very extreme that a farmer producing 6,400 can be stocked at 92, and a farmer next door 66 is producing 106. I suppose look at 5-band system would be fairer. Lawrence, as a comment, maybe you might deal with, because you did, I suppose, differentiate the volume of milk in each of the various bands, you know.
Yeah, so I suppose we you know, just to make the point that, you know, I suppose if we take the principle that a cow that's producing more milk is producing more organic, and then we're down to, you know, and I don't think anyone can probably disagree with that, then we're down to how do you implement something that's fair. And always there's going to be winners and losers here. So when we looked at this and put in 5 and 6 bands, which is probably the alternative to what's there, you know, the farmers that are up around that, you know, 7.5, 8,000, whatever, their organic ends start coming in at 120, 121, 125, you know. So the further, you know, the more bands we have, basically means more, I suppose, pressure at the extremities as well. So I suppose, you know, another question that has come up in the last few days is on solids. Should it be on solids? And just to be clear, in these bands and in these calculations, it's a solid-based calculation because we have the average fat and protein. We didn't include fat and protein or solids in the triggers. The triggers are at 4.5 and 6.5. And that was to, I suppose, minimize disruption for farmers. So if we put in, or if we, you know, and again, that's a decision that I suppose the department will have to make, but if you put in a solids-based trigger point, essentially what you're going to have is a double hit for a farmer. You'll have a volume hit or a solids hit. And that's something that we try to, I suppose, minimize the disruption. You know, there's been massive progress at farm level on milk protein and fat in the last, you know, 10 years, huge, and it's worth an awful lot of money to farmers. And the last thing we want to do, especially around constrained milk processing, is to slow that down. So that's why we didn't put it on solids and put it on volume.
Okay. 1 second now here. I have a comment, I think, or a question. Is anecdotal evidence of fertilizer usage behavior, this is from Simon, reflected in the program? Increasing after fodder prices, reducing when price goes up? Should there be a tax on fertilizer, or should proof of adequate soil pH balancing to optimize fertilizer usage become mandatory in the regulations? I think that's a comment more than a question. And I suppose as a part of the consultation, it's something that we encourage all participants to participate and put in writing what they propose. Or does anybody want to comment on that? No, I'll take this as quietness. Random independent verification of soil sample results. In terms of verification of soil sample results, is the processes for that? Maybe just look at, rather than get into some of the detail on that, Jack, we're rolling out a soil sampling program this autumn, which was announced by the Minister earlier in the year to generate much greater detail in terms of soil sampling, particularly around carbon. Do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, so it was announced in the budget last year, Bill, as under the programme for government and the commitment to soil health and improving soil fertility, 10 million would be allocated to a free soil sampling programme for farmers. A tender was awarded a few weeks ago, and in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, the programme will start. Farmers will be able to apply on ag food, and as well as doing the major elements, it'll do trace elements and carbon. So it'll give farmers an accurate reflection of what's happening in their soil, because soil health, and David works in the area of soil health and might comment, or Bernard is leading on this programme, is so important and is something we haven't focused on enough. Like, we'll probably get criticised for reducing the nitrogen allowances. And yet, as Bernard pointed out, we're not using enough lime, we're not using enough P or K, we're not thinking about things like iron, manganese and copper. So these are all opportunities here, and that's what the government has seen and identified. And we'd encourage as many people as possible to apply. There will be a if you apply, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get in. There will be kind of so many dairy farmers in Cork, so many beef farmers and so on, right across the country. But the key thing here is that any farmer that does apply, when they get back the results, to use them. So if they read them themselves, that's brilliant. If they don't, if they ask an ag advisor or somebody in the co-op, but that we're getting an accurate use of soil sample results. As regards independent verification, I think fertilizer is so dear that we've moved on. What's the point in falsifying soil samples? I just don't see it. That's something for a scheme maybe, but farmers are business people, and I'd say 99% more are, they're doing exactly what they should be doing, and that's what we want to promote and encourage.
Yeah, okay. Michael has a comment here about, I suppose, the impact and the adaptation required at farm level in relation to farming, and he identifying that he aims to spread the last of his fertilizer by mid-August, and September is too late, and certainly a storage issue on most farms. But he proposes a timely text should be sent to herd owners as we approach the close period for spreading, and again from late December, to remind people to obey the law. Certainly an interesting one. He cites also similar text message provisions in relation to hedge cutting and buffer zones. So I think something that we certainly can consider, you know. Okay, I had a couple here from Aidan as well. One of them is the whole issue of separation of clean water and storage. One, does this mean that open yards and topless cubicles need to be roofed? And separately, I think it's also, is an outdoor slatted tank considered covered? If I'm not mistaken, I saw that later.
No, you don't have to cover them, and a slatted tank is considered to be covered. The whole idea here is to reduce ammonia losses, and one of the questions there as well is, why is ammonia being considered as part of this? And I think David answered that very well when he said this is all about reducing nitrogen losses. If we can keep the nitrogen in the slurry, we'll get more value from it. Spreading it is costing you 50, 55 euro an hour if you get in a tanker, more if you get in an umbilical system. So we want to keep the nitrogen in the slurry and apply it to land and reduce expensive chemical fertilizer.
Okay. One for the tillage sector. Austin asked the question, sorry, it's probably more a comment. Regarding the proposal to cultivate arable ground 7 days post-harvest, what's the logic? Blanket stubble cultivation in broken weather, which is typical of an average harvest in Ireland. Not this year, Austin, it's been tremendous weather for harvesting, but it could cause an increase in the potential for nitrates, phosphorus, phosphate runoff, and therefore have a negative environmental consequence. Stubble cultivation in suitable weather has many benefits, but reducing the potential for runoff is not one. I think that's a comment more than...
Can I comment on that one, Bill?
You can indeed.
Donald mentioned the EPA assessment, the catchment assessment. In the Barrow and the Slaney, 30%, and they're really problem catchments. 30% of the nitrogen in the water is coming from arable land. And if we can get shallow cultivation quickly after harvest, there's potential there to soak up, on average, about 50 kilos per hectare of nitrogen, which is the same as a bag and a half a can. Nobody's going to be asked to go out and mess in. You know, if it's a wet weather, so be it. Like, but the principle is, how else are we going to reduce nitrogen losses from these areas? And Bernard said it in his presentation. Each of these measures have a saving, and when they add them all up, we get to where we want to get to. So if we take that away from the tillage sector, which is responsible for 30% of the nitrogen and water in these catchments, what are we going to do? It needs to be early, it needs to be prompt. It only needs to be a tickle of the land. If it's a straw tine that'll get natural regeneration going, fine. It doesn't have to be a big disc. A light disc, get it going. But it's going to result in a huge saving in nitrogen losses, and it's essential.
Okay, two questions then. I'm going to bring the two of them together because they're quite topical in terms of the comments. And perhaps David, maybe you might comment, or Donald. What has air quality got to do with the Nitrates Directive? And similarly, why has Ag Climatise been included in the Nitrates derogation consultation? From Paul and Owen. Okay. So I don't know who wants to comment in terms of that, like the interconnectedness of effectively of ammonia with nitrates.
Bill, I might just come in on the at a policy level. I mean, you see it across Europe, and nationally we need to move more towards joining up policy areas like water quality, like air quality, like climate adaptation and mitigation. Working within our own individual silos will only get us so far. We don't have the resources to tackle everything in the way we should. So I think it makes sense to where we can get measures into the Nitrates Action Programme that can have knock-on benefits for biodiversity or air quality or climate, then I think it's sensible that we do that. So that's kind of the reasoning behind referencing those policy areas.
Okay. One of the big things for me is, I suppose, I deal with climate change as well, and air quality, and agriculture, I think as somebody pointed out earlier, is responsible for 98-99% of ammonia emissions. And we've been non-compliant from approximately 2016 with a regraduation of ammonia emissions in the very recent past. In that context, I think ammonia is very much part of that nitrogen cycle. So when we look at the overall theme, which is to maximize the efficiency of our nitrogen into the system, protein requires amino acid, which requires nitrogen in terms of its construct. But let's be clear, as a system, we're probably turning out 25, maybe 30% of nitrogen from the system out the gate in terms of product, and you consequently have to, the objective should be to minimize the losses either to water, to the atmosphere, or to air quality. Is that a fair comment, David, or you comment in terms of the interconnectedness of that?
The connectedness there, I suppose, the link between I suppose ammonia emissions being a little bit different than greenhouse gas emissions. Ammonia emissions are usually deposited close to where they're lost. So the issue would be, I suppose, sensitive habitats, etc., that you can get deposition of nitrogen from that emission in the local area. And I suppose that's where the connectedness comes with water quality, or with, I suppose, bogs or habitats like that. So it does act as a fertilizer. Okay.
Comment here, will water quality improve if nitrogen fixed from clover replaces chemical fertilizer? Approved. Will adding water to slurry not improve the availability of the nitrogen in slurry to the grass, plant or crop? Anybody want to take that?
So just in terms of the efficiency factor, yes, more dilute slurry will be more efficient in terms of I suppose, extraction from that slurry and nitrogen use, and there's papers, published papers to show that. I suppose in terms of the issue that's been outlined here, I suppose it's more to do with the storage, I suppose, rather than the efficiency per se on any day of the year.
Okay, I'm going to take two more questions from this and then move back to just checking on anything else. So one of the questions is, will soil type and soil sample results have any bearing on stocking rates going forward? That's from James. And also from John, was 2018 an inaccurate year to base water test results on, considering the extended drought and high nitrogen levels in soil? Somebody, Jack, will you take the first question maybe? And Donald, you might kind of comment in terms of, I suppose, yes, we've had a peak of 2018, but the overall pressure in terms of nitrogen has increased, you know, in terms of the overall trend, rather than just, and it certainly 2018 was a peak year and a little bit out of kilter, but the overall trend is negative. Jack, firstly.
I suppose I didn't mention it earlier on, Bill, and I should have. The Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme that's funded by government, the Department of Housing, ourselves, Teagasc, and the dairy industry, which has put free advisors on the ground. And when these advisors go onto the ground, they find that certain parts of the field, never mind certain parts of the farm, are leakier than others. And I think farmers know this themselves. So soil type is really the most important thing. And farmers know where they can spread slurry early or where they can let out stock early. And where we want to get to is detailed one-to-one advice, but that's expensive. So I suppose the question is out there, and it's a challenge that industry are starting to take up, and we'd like them to take up more. Who is going to fund this on-farm advice to farmers? Because that's what's needed, because anyone that ploughs a field can see the variation in soil across it. So yes, definitely, you should be taking different action depending on the soil type in the different fields. As regards the phosphorus, the soil sample results, really a lot of it comes down to connectivity as well. If you have soils that are connected to water or to streams, or the land is able to, the phosphorus is able to flow over it, like we see if we get bad poaching, that's worse than having index 4 soils. So we would like to get to a detailed soil specific regulation, but that's difficult and it's a long way off, and it's going to take a lot of injection of money and support, and that's really where industry needs to come in to support what we're all trying to do around water quality.
Okay. Donald, do you want to comment on the 2018 spike and the...
Yeah, Bill, I suppose you're right. I mean, when you mentioned it, it is a spike, you know, and to be fair, most of the water monitoring that data that's there, it stretches back to, we've a really good body of data going right back into the 80s, coming up till now. We're getting more accurate with the monitoring that's done, and it's generally it's representative. So it's, although you might have one peak year, over time it does even out. But like you said, the overall trend is going the wrong direction, and that's what we need to focus on rather than worrying whether 2018 has skewed the figures.
Okay, I have one hand up which I want to deal with. Barrett. Is it Patrick Barrett? Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down now to find it.
Could I make one comment there, Bill, just to add to Donald's comment? Yeah, just to say, look at, and I think Jack mentioned it earlier, advice is very important. We saw a lot of advice went out in 2018 where nitrogen was put out, and we saw the negative impact of it. What we will say is we had a regional drought last year around the southeast in counties Kildare, Laois, around that area there last May, June, and we saw tailored advice happen, and we saw a pullback in terms of, for example, chemical nitrogen usage in that time. So it's very responsive, and the advisory system has been responsive over the last number of years in improving the message to farmers, but I think that has to be acknowledged, you know.
Bill, could I just come in there?
You can indeed.
I've opened John Barrett's microphone if you wanted to go to him.
And Jerry Long, please too.
Just to make the point that we have, I suppose, if you go back and look at, you know, the tools we have now as well, you know, that we didn't have maybe 5 or 6 years ago, like pasture base, they can give us that regional growth, and that, you know, that the potential for providing tailored advice, whether it's using the grass growth models or using regional data from farms, has advanced dramatically. So there is a lot more scope now to provide regional advice, which you didn't have in the past.
Okay, so our tools are improving. John Barrett and Jerry Long have hands up, so Jerry, I think your mic is open there if you want to come in, and John, I think yours is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, sure, I suppose, you know, I mean, this is a work in progress, and it's, I suppose the end result here is that I suppose that whatever we do, that shows results, you know, and that's the important thing. Just maybe a few quick comments there about the closing date for slurry back to the 15th of September. Would it not be maybe more beneficial to both farmer and everybody that does a bit of late spread, maybe for paddocks in the spring, maybe to have 80% of your slurry spread by the 15th of September and leave an open gap there for a small amount, considering you know, that you spread slurry during the best growing season, you know, but leave a small percentage of there for the guys that do a bit at the very end of the season there to grow a bit of grass for the spring. That'd be one comment. Getting back then, I suppose, to the storing of soil water, I do believe our real issue and our real problem is around slurry storage. And I suppose farmers need to have an opportunity to spread slurry whenever, you know, the weather permits and whenever they want to go out, not maybe being, you know, going out because the tank is flown over and carry on. So I would see no issue around, maybe Jack has a different opinion on it. I'd have no issue around a month's storage for silage water at the back of a parlour, but 2 months slurry, 2 months, you know, 2 months there for closed period for silage water at the back of a parlour for a guy that's winter milking is tough going. I do firmly believe that silage water, I spread 6 loads myself today, and it is water. And the difference in that is possible. It is 99% water, 98% water. When you go to a slurry tank, either urine or dung, it's probably 99% urine or dung. So I can't see how soil water is doing that much damage if it is operational and done right on a maybe, you know, a basis of what tankers come up with there, 25 litres something per cow per day, if it's done at the right time with good farming practices. And this is a month of slurry storage there to account for that. So I do believe that the focus here should be on slurry storage, giving farmers the opportunity to spread slurry as what was pointed out here, instead of using maybe nitrogen at times to spread it during the year. So the focus on that one should be on slurry storage. Just getting back maybe to Lauren Chalou's, you know, the 3 bands there. I'd like to ask Lawrence, I suppose, and just wonder, like, he did explain a bit why he put it on milk yield, but did it give the calf that comes off of the cow that pushes this forward any consideration whatsoever, considering we're after giving about 2 or 3 years now trying to deal with a calf welfare issue in Ireland? So I'd like just maybe to ask him that question, or where would we be in 5 to 10 years time if we do push down this road of these 3 bands? I'll leave it at that for now, Bill. Thank you very much.
Okay. Lawrence, there's a great question on you. I think if you can answer it, you know.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, I suppose I presume Jerry's heading there that there would be a movement back to that lower milk yield. And to be honest, I don't think we'd see that as a result of this. All this is designed to do is reflect the nitrogen output from the cow. I don't see any impact on the calf issue. Like if we look at the milk solids from the three categories, the milk solids from the three categories were virtually the same in terms of fat and protein. So I don't think we can say that there's any one cohort or another within those categories, or we'd be picking it up there. But what it does do is, maybe those, once a day farmers or whatever that are operating, they may, I suppose, get a different set of numbers based on this. Final point is, when we looked at the stocking rate of the different categories, the stocking rate of the lower milk yield band is actually less, that's the lowest stocking rate currently operated. The middle band is the middle stocking rate, and the high milk yield category has the highest stocking rate. So not alone are they producing more organic N per cow, but they're also operating at the highest stocking rate. They're bringing in the most concentrated feed, and their surplus N was about 50 kilos higher than the lower category.
Sorry folks, and the other question though was the content really, Jack. Maybe you'd comment on that, like, because soil water might be 99% water, but I suppose pig manure is probably 96% water, particularly on a wet feeding systems. So slurry would even be what, 94, 95% water, depending on the distance.
Sorry, Bill. There's a paper there, and thanks Jerry for the question. There's a paper there from 2015 from Dennis Minogue, a Teagasc researcher, God rest him, and he showed there was 13 kilos of nitrogen, I can't remember the P and K, in the soil water produced over the year by the dairy cow. And you'll see a benefit from applying soil water because there's nitrogen in it. It does make sense to mix it with slurry when you're applying it with low emission equipment. A couple of people have asked that. Like, it does, you need it to dilute it, like, but the only issue there around what Jerry is saying, 80% out, and that makes sense. In the old reps, if anybody remembers it, you used to have 50% out by June and the rest out by the end of September. It was part of good practice, and I never remember any problems with it. Is controlling that slurry for the rest of the year. If farmers had enough storage, I don't think they'd be spreading slurry in December, but it is a proposal that should be put in writing. I'd suggest that it's put in writing, this idea that 80% should be out, say, by the 1st of September, and then look at a precision system like Lawrence is talking about. Like, if you watch the farming forecast now on a Sunday, you'll see grass growth for the week ahead. Is that something we should be thinking about, that there's a slurry forecast for the week ahead for vulnerable times of the year as well? Because remember, like everybody will say after this, or someone usually says, I can't spread in November on a dry week, but it can spread in January when it's spilling rain. And that doesn't really make sense. You're dumping slurry. You shouldn't spread slurry unless ground and weather conditions are suitable. And just to clarify, there was a question there again about why is ammonia being included here. Ammonia is a source of nitrogen, and nitrogen ends up in water. If it's deposited on land, it's going to end up in water. And that's why low emission equipment and covering stores are being considered here. But I would encourage Jerry and whoever's going to come next to put in their suggestions.
Okay, I'm going to give two last questions then to people around. John Barrett. John is still with us there. You have your hand up, but you'll have to unmute yourself. And also, I have one other then that I want to try and bring in, which is, if I can find it, Eamon Healy. And you again will have to unmute yourself, either of those two, if they'd like to ask their question. No? Okay.
Eamon's mic is open now.
Bill?
Eamon, are you there?
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, just on the diluted slurry, my understanding is that diluted slurry has a...
Eamon, come back to us. One second, I just checked. Has Eamon muted himself again somewhere? Eamon, you've muted yourself, or?
His mic is still open. Now his mic is closed. Now it's open again.
Eamon. Ag House calling Eamon. All right, Tony Mullins, you have your hand up there. Would you like to come in? And folks, I'm conscious of taking everybody's time. Like, look at, I am going to close it
Tony
fairly.
needs to unmute as well. Tony's mic is open from this side.
Tony Mullins, can you unmute? And Eamon,
Can you hear
maybe
me?
you're there.
Can you hear
Tony.
me, Bill? Yeah, okay, thanks very much for the opportunity. The first point I want to make there, and it was kind of answered already, but I didn't get the full grasp of it. Regarding the closed period, are we still talking about 16 weeks of a calculation for Zone A, even though that the ban on slurry spreading would that's proposed is adding another month onto it, which would make it 20 weeks. And like there's a fair amount of slurry produced in those extra 4 weeks. We'll say when you're doing a bit of buffer feeding, that sort of thing, soil temperatures are high and there is a lot of potential there for growth over the winter if those nutrients are applied in good weather. The second point I want to make is about the covering of slurry stores. I think it's a crazy proposal because, as we've heard there on several occasions tonight, the more dilute your slurry is, the more efficient use of N, that is getting into the soil, rather than sticking onto the grass. And there is difficulties with agitating those slurry stores, and I couldn't see how it should be possible with overhead agitators. If you have a cover on it, how would you get around to actually using that sort of a mechanical device? With regard to the soil water, if I'm interpreting Jack Nolan there correctly, I kind of cautiously welcome his interpretation of it, that if you did have overall storage, that would do that you wouldn't have to disrupt your farmyard to cater for soil water to be stored separately. The last point I want to make there is with regard to the tillage sector and the I suppose going back to the closed period for spreading. Like a lot of winter cereals are planted there at the end of September, early October, and especially the peak slurry application is a big part of the nutrient program for those crops. And there's in this part of the country anyway, should be a big issue, I would think, if the closed period was brought back to the 15th of September. I'd just like maybe a few comments on those points, please. Thank you.
Okay, Peter Fleming has a hand up as well. Jack, do you want to just answer a couple of those questions, if you don't mind?
Yep, thanks very much for the question. The idea with the slurry is that you'd manage it so that you'd have the slurry out as soon as possible. You'd get the tanks empty. Like normally what we see at the end of the year is that if there's grass growth, people don't want to spread it, and then we end up with a problem with the closed period. But again, if it's something that you feel that there should be a percentage out and then there should be an allowance based on a text or whatever kind of system from Moore Park, so be it. On the covering slurry stores, you're right around the dilution, but there is the issue of ammonia. It's expensive to spread this stuff and it's costing money, but it's really an ammonia issue and reducing the value of the slurry that's there. But again, put it in around the soiled water. And sorry, I'd just like to clarify as well, since the regulation came in, a clean silage pit is counted as clean water and the water can be diverted away from it as long as it's kept clean. It's not counted as soiled water. That just came up. On the tillage sector, I'm no expert on winter cereals, but there are people on here that are. And I genuinely believe that most winter cereals don't require nitrogen, and maybe that's why we have such high losses from arable land in the winter period. Because if we have, like if you look out at stubbles down here in Wexford at the minute, there's a lot of regrowth already being fueled by the nitrogen that's in the soil. And now if I put in pig slurry, which is great rocket fuel, on top of that, and the nitrogen is very available, we'll get losses. And I wonder why we can't top dress in spring with dribble bars, like 12-meter dribble bars. Some people are doing that already. Others may say different, Bill, but I think slurry is better applied in the spring when we have the growing season, soil temperatures are coming up. I don't think there's a need for it on winter cereals except on worn ground, or else in front of oilseed rape. That's generally speaking sown in August, and you'll get a great take up of nitrogen again.
Yeah.
But again, sorry, it's something that should be put in writing if people believe it.
One of the things as well that I remember being on farms in Denmark years ago was outdoor tanks, you know, on the crust required in terms of ammonia, you know, and it wasn't including the water, but one of the things was you had to agitate beneath the crust, so they had, you know, side agitation points and things like that in the tank rather than, you know, the more common downward pressure pipe, you know. Peter Fleming, you're open there and you have the floor, please.
Yeah, can you hear me, Bill?
I can indeed. I hope everybody else can too. Go ahead.
No, we've discussed this at the most recent Ballyroe board meeting, and guys are quite concerned about the whole thing, Bill, in the context that they feel, I suppose, that farming and dairy farming in particular is almost under attack, you know. I suppose the whole environment now, from the environmental people and whatever, and every night we turn on our television set, we see another weather event or whatever. And agriculture, I think, unfairly is being blamed in many respects. Now, there are cowboys in every industry, and we certainly aren't condoning any of that. But then we realise that you guys are the people that represent us in Europe, and we understand that you understand about agriculture. But we feel a small bit as a farmer, I suppose, almost that the government has kind of almost turned its back on us. You know, when the country was in real trouble there, time of the financial crisis, agriculture was to kind of save the day, and with Food Harvest 2020 and Food Wise 2025, and I think in fairness we responded and we expanded and we took the target advice and we did all the things we were supposed to do. But now this seems to me to be kind of a coded way really of just reducing stocking rate. I mean, there are a lot of people in the environmental pillar who would like us basically to stop farming and stop milking cows and stop spreading slurry and whatever. But being perfectly honest, if we were to stop, if Ireland was to stop producing dairy, I don't think it would make an iota of difference in the whole context of global climate change. And I think that message needs to be got across hugely, because down here, agriculture is the only game in town. And as I say, I know you have to go to Europe and you have to try to explain, because the European Parliament is obviously, there's a huge green influence there, and with Ursula von der Leyen championing the farm to fork and all the other things. We certainly want to do our bit, but we want it to be practical. And like the department not including, and correct me if I'm wrong here, grants for farm equipment or dairy equipment to be included in the new TAMS going forward. That's basically turning it back and saying, lads, we don't want to help you expand or help you to maintain, not necessarily expand, but to maintain your facilities and to have your facilities at, you know, at a level that they should be in terms of labour and etc. And final point, I agree 100% with Jerry Long there when he was making the point about the soil water. Like, I mean, for the level of gain that can be got there, I just think that what's being asked of people from a financial perspective is so onerous with regard to, you know, and then I'm glad that Bill or that Jack made a point there that tanks didn't necessarily have to be covered at least immediately, but there needs to be a degree of practicality in the whole argument, and we're very dependent on you guys, all you guys there, who understand the industry and know about it, to put our point of view across. And all I'm reflecting there is what guys are saying at ground level.
Okay, Peter, and thanks for that. But can I challenge you as well, though? And look, we know each other a while, and I worked down in West Cork for a while as well. But like, you know, am I not mistaken? Let's say in terms of chairing one of the co-ops, you're hearing as well the market expectation. You know that this isn't just regulatory. You know, and in terms of what the consumer is expecting, you know, from the co-ops in relation to sustainability. And I suppose water just being one of those, you know, that declining water trends has an accompanying risk to the industry as well. Maybe you'd comment on that from the, you know, from the co-op point of view in relation to what you're hearing on sustainability, because certainly we're hearing it, you know, across the co-op structure of that sustainability is critical. You know, there's an expectation of improvement, you know, and it's it's an absolute minimum, and that's what was recognised in the food vision process. You know, that sustainability was certainly going to be at the core. It had to be sustainability for producers, sustainability in the environment, degree of innovation brought into it. There's 4 pillars. But maybe a comment from the co-op side in terms of, you know, from a market expectation.
Yeah, I do, Bill, and like everybody down here, like, you know, a lot of us with the good summer now particularly like to go out there and have a swim in Dunworley or in Chidani or wherever around the place. And of course we want to have quality and clean water, and we want the tourists to come around here, which, and other than agriculture, tourism is the only other game in town. We want the quality of the water to be good. And as farmers, we don't want to be seen as environmental terrorists. But what I am saying is, any regulation or any condition or being imposed by the department or whatever has got to be practical. Like Bill, you know, on a really wet day in the winter time and there's a deluge of rain, like it's very, very difficult to bottle every last drop of dirty water. We all I'm asking is that things have to be practical, and it's grand for John Jordan and everybody else up in Orno to kind of highlight and champion sustainability. And of course we want that image to continue, and family farm, etc., etc. And there are probably guys that have expanded exponentially, and maybe their slurry storage hasn't been proportional to that expansion, and maybe they need to kind of, you know, get their house in order. But for the average family farm guy that's doing the best they can and hopes to continue, and that the next generation will continue, all I'm saying is that the bar would not be set so high by an influence of non-farming people to bring about an expectation that's not reasonable from a practical farming point of view. And again, I highlight the point that you are the people that we are very dependent on for our message to be put to government and to Europe.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I would comment overall, you know, that I suppose we have a leadership responsibility as well, you know, to industry, and sometimes that is tough calls. This is not easy, Peter. I fully accept that. And there's no point, and we're certainly not going to claim it's easy. But the ambition is that it's practical, you know, that it makes a difference, and that's the objective and the rationale for the consultation this evening and through other events. I know Lawrence has identified that, you know, we have more parties on next week. The department will certainly be there for 2 of the days, and there will also be nitrates as discussed as part of that open day. But we do have a leadership responsibility, and the trends are in the wrong direction, and we cannot ignore that, and it does require us to also set out a sustainable pathway for everybody, but through engagement. And I want to be clear on that. That is the objective here. I think tonight I'm going to close it now because we've had a good lengthy debate. It was a beautiful evening. I want to thank the speakers who gave it our time this evening, but I think from my perspective, the objective was to be open and transparent in terms of some of the drivers here. As I said, it's not easy, but people need to understand, you know, what are the drivers for change and why are people being asked to take on actions. But I have no doubt, you know, that farmers, once given a roadmap, a direction of travel, are very quick to embrace. And sure, we might debate about timelines, but once the direction of travel is in the right direction, I think everybody can work together. However, the direction of travel has not been in the right trends in terms of water in recent years, and that's something we have to deal with. And I think that's through collective engagement with the likes of yourselves and with other government departments. I just want to remind people, because I am closing it down now, is that it is a consultation. So I'd like to encourage people to make their thoughts and views known in writing. You'll find the consultation papers are on the both government departments' website, and that is by the 20th of September to make your submission to the Nitrates Consultation, Water Advisory Unit, Housing, Local Government and Heritage Department, Custom House, Dublin 1. And as I said, there was over 100 to the first stage of the consultation, and we certainly hope that there's significant engagement this time again. That will then feed into a process of review by the expert working group, which will then, as I set out at the beginning, make recommendations to the ministers for consideration in the next development of regulation. In 2018, we brought out a nitrates explanatory handbook, I think, which was quite useful in terms of giving people a sense of detail, you know, as to what the implications, so that there's a very clear understanding, and it was in very, I suppose, easy language and understandable language. And certainly that's something I think we will consider again this time. So on everybody's behalf, I'd like to thank the speakers, to thank Donald, Bernard and Lawrence, and also our contribution from David Wall and Jack on your behalf, and as I said, to remind you then in terms of that consultation. So on that, I think we've had a good discussion and debate. We're nearly at 2 hours, so I appreciate everybody's participation on what was a lovely evening. So thank you very much. It's hard to get feedback in this process, so good night and safe home. Thank you.